How y'all doing? Yeah, you good? All right. We're moving into the third week of this, and it's taking a little bit longer than I anticipated. We're still in the history, but once I lay the foundation of the history, and then we move into the theology, you have a better understanding of why the theology is the way that it is, based on the history that we've gone through. So I'm going to spend a lot of time laying the groundwork for the history, so that we can make up time in the theology and the liturgy part. Because you already have by the time we get to the liturgy, you already have a really good idea, based on the history and the theology of why the liturgy is the way it is and why we do and don't do certain things. So I'm going to just give you a brief reminder of where we were 2 weeks ago, which I believe that we were just beginning to talk about Queen Mary. And if you remember, Mary is the daughter of Henry to his first wife, which is Catherine of Aragon. And if you remember how that marriage ended, that's what sparked the whole Reformation. So what you've got is Catherine of Aragon being dismissed by Henry, and Mary goes with Catherine of Aragon. Therefore, Mary has become very much entrenched in the Roman Church and wants nothing to do with Reformation. The Reformation is not just an inconvenient idea to her. It is something that has undone the entirety of her life. She has been uprooted as a result of it. So she is no friend of the reformers. So when Mary comes in and takes over, she is immediately going to shift England back to Rome, back to the Roman Church and the Roman ideas. And so when you have a nation that was Roman Catholic and then brought out of that over years and years and years, and then all of a sudden is thrown back into it, you can imagine that there's a bit of kind of uneasiness, a bit of not knowing what's right and what's wrong, and there's a sense that you can't undo some of the things that were done. And that's really where we ended last week, was what are some of the things that you can't undo? And we talked about it before. You can't undo the monasteries. The property is sold. So you can't undo the reading of Scripture, which is a really big one. The people now read the Bible. They've now began to form their own ideas. Remember, we were 6 years into the Reformation. So they've had time to read the Bible. And if you remember, Thomas Cranmer wrote skeleton sermons for the clergy and said, preach this. Stop coming up with your crazy own ideas. They're horrible. Stop preaching your own sermons. They're terrible. Preach this. And he gave them what to preach, which was basically the Protestant gospel. And the people heard it over and over and over again for 6 years. You can't undo that stuff. And so when Mary is going to try to bring them back into the Roman Church, she's going to run into some problems because there's things that they can't undo. You can't unhear the sermons, and you can't unread the Bible. So they're going to run into some problems. Let's see here. Okay. So Mary's going to try and move them forward. And what she's going to do is she's going to get rid of Thomas Cranmer. She's going to get the Bibles back out of the church. Clergy are going to be separated. I think I'm going the wrong way. Oh no, that's backwards. Okay. I'm all backwards. Here we go. Um, but she couldn't undo everything. And we went through, this is where we ended, in all the stuff that she can't undo. They're open to returning to the Roman church, but it has to look a little bit different than it did before. Because now they've read the Bible, they've heard the sermons, they know the gospel of Jesus Christ in a way in which they never had before. Ironically, though, Mary's going to have the same problem that Henry had. And that's as Mary is trying to move them back into the Reformation, she's going to have a problem of she needs an heir to the throne. Everybody's going to need an heir to the throne. You're going to want somebody that you can hand this down to that can carry on your legacy. Otherwise, you're in trouble. And so Mary is going to need an heir to the throne. Otherwise, everything she does is going to be pretty much pointless. So Mary's going to have to marry. And she's going to marry Philip II of Spain, which is a really, really bad decision. And so it's a bad decision because Spain and Philip, they were ruthless enemies of the Reformation. The English people really don't like Philip II. And so he's going to remind them of the Spanish Inquisition. It's just a really poor decision that she makes. But nonetheless, she makes the decision. She marries Philip of Spain. Then there's going to be a point where she's going to give the reformers pretty much one of three decisions. They can do one of three things. The first thing that they can do is they can recant everything that they've said. They can say, what we said was wrong, the Roman Church is right, we're sorry, we apologize. That's the first option that they have. Not many people are going to take that option, but it is an option. You might be surprised on who actually does take that option. The second option is that they can run for their lives. The second option is you get out of England as fast as you can. And the third option is you can die. And those are the three options that are presented to the reformers. Now, what you'll find is that, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it appears as though Thomas Cranmer took option number one, which is recant. The people that Thomas Cranmer brought in, Martin Bucer, Peter Martyr, they're not even from England. So it's a very easy decision for them. They're like, we're out of here. See ya. It was fun ride while we were here. We're gone. And they left. And the rest of them died. The rest of the reformers died. So they had the three options presented before them. Under Mary, you're going to have 300 reformers being burned at the stake. And some of them pretty high up in name and title and as far as the people recognition. So the first to go is John Hooper. And John Hooper's the first to go because he's the most radical of the reformers. He is essentially Presbyterian. So you've got a Presbyterian in Anglican robes, and he is the first to go. And that's generally how they run through this, is the most radical reformers are the ones that are going to be picked off first. John Hooper is going to be burned at the stake. It's going to pretty much set everybody on notice that this is real. That you really do have a couple options, and one is run, and the other is recant, and the other is die. And this is real. And so John Hooper is going to be burned at the stake, and then following John Hooper, you're going to have the Oxford Martyrs. We have in the collects, we have a collect for the Oxford Martyrs. It's a collect that I put in there every Reformation Sunday. And it's about Nicholas Ridley and Hugh Latimer. And the reason that I do it is because they're going to be burned at the stake together. And so what they're going to do is they're going to take them and they're going to strap them to a stake back to back, one on this side, one on this side. And so really cool. It's kind of legend, but with some history behind it. So we don't know 100% that this actually took place, but it's really cool if it did. But before that, what you're going to see is that when you light a fire, and if you're going to be burned by fire, you want a lot of flames and you want it to be real quick. And Hugh Latimer is going to go up super quick, and Nicholas Ridley is going to take a long time. Nicholas Ridley is going to suffer immensely. And it's recorded that the horrible sight actually moved the crowd to tears. The crowd that was cheering for the burning of Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley is moved to tears because the fire doesn't quite light on his side the way that it should, and it's very slow. So it's a very slow, painful death. But it's recorded in history that right before the flames were lit, that Hugh Latimer said to Nicholas Ridley, "Be of good cheer, Master Ridley, and play the man, for we shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England that I trust it shall never be put out." And it's just this really cool quote of somebody who's facing death saying, take comfort in knowing that our death is going to spark something in the English people that will never be extinguished. That we will go down in history as a part of the Reformation moving forward. And he was right. It never went out. So you have Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley being burned at the stake. That's 3 of your main 4 English reformers. There's only one person left. And the one person left is Thomas Cranmer, who is the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so Thomas Cranmer has to actually watch this. He is in a prison, and I think I have a picture of it. He's in this prison here, and on the street is where they're burned at the stake. Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, John Hooper, and Thomas Cranmer is made to watch it, all in an attempt to get him to recant. Because if Queen Mary can get the Archbishop of Canterbury to recant his Protestantism, that's a huge victory for Mary. And so he's made to watch everything that he's done be undone. He's made to watch all of his friends be burned at the stake. And he's made to do it from that prison there. And it's an effective tactic. Because at the end, right before he's taken out to be burned at the stake, Thomas Cranmer recants. And he writes down that he recants everything that he said. And so you've got this massive victory for Mary and this tremendous failure for the Reformation. Well, for me, what it gives you is some sort of lens into the realness of the situation that people are facing. So if we just talk about this guy died, this guy died, this guy died, this girl died, if we just talk about all these people that are willing to give their life, I'm not sure that you walk away with the understanding of this is real. Thomas Cranmer is the leader of the English Reformation. And in watching all of his friends die, in watching all of his work be undone, he recants. He's terrified. He does not want the same fate. He wants any way that he can get out of it. And so he recants his Protestantism. It's this massive victory. And then Mary's going to make a just colossal mistake. One of many. and that is that Mary decides to burn Thomas Cranmer anyways. And that's not abnormal for the Roman medieval church. And so she's going to decide to burn Thomas Cranmer anyways, and it's a really unpopular decision because Thomas Cranmer is beloved by the people. And even though they're moving back to Rome, he's still beloved. And he did everything he could to save his life, and she's still going to burn him at the stake. And so, however, when Thomas Cranmer is brought out before the council, he refuses to read his recantation. Instead, he refers to himself as a Protestant, although a cowardly one. And it's this really cool, again, it just gives you a realness of the circumstances that Thomas Cranmer is facing. He's going back and forth, back and forth. He's not sure that he has the strength to actually follow through with this. But when he gets out there, he can't recant. And he refers to himself as a cowardly reformer. In England, he is going to be burned at the stake in 1556, March 21st. He's led out to the very same place that Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley were burned at the stake about 5 months later. And as the flames are lit, again, it's recorded, not 100% sure that this happened, but it's recorded that when the flames are lit, Thomas Cranmer took his right hand and put it in the fire and said, this hand burns first because it offended thee. And he's referring to his written recantation, that he never should have done that. So he takes his hand, puts it into the fire. And then after which Thomas Cranmer is burned. It's recorded, again, in relative silence. And so the first Protestant Archbishop of Canterbury is burned. You can go to England and you can see that site. That's supposed to be a marker on the road of where they were burned at the stake. It's kind of really neat. I've not seen it. I don't really have a ton of desire to go to England, but except to see that. And I don't know that it's worth all that. I'm just going to look at a great picture of it. But it's a really cool memorial to the Protestant reformers. So you're going to have John Hooper, Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, Thomas Cranmer all burned at the stake for their Protestant views. The rest of them ran. The rest of them ran as far away as they could get. Now, what you're going to have is Queen Mary is now with Philip II from Spain, and the goal is to produce an heir to the throne. And Mary is going to think, I could have swore I was pregnant here. And we really shouldn't laugh about this, but it's going to turn out that she's not pregnant, that she has stomach cancer, and she's going to die. And so Mary is going to die without an heir to the throne, which is the same thing that happened to Philip when he got tuberculosis at the age of 16, 15, I can't remember exactly, 15, I think. So he's going to die without an heir to the throne. Mary is going to bring them back to Rome, and then she's going to die without an heir to the throne. If there's no heir to the throne from Mary, who is going to take her place? Okay, so remember, you go back, Henry had 3 children, and the second child born is Elizabeth, and she was born to Anne Boleyn. So you have Elizabeth, who is now going to take the place of Mary. And when Elizabeth hears the news of Mary's death, she greets the news with Psalm 118:23. Does anybody know that psalm? It's a great quote. It is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. So um, Elizabeth is going to take the throne. And Elizabeth is a Protestant through and through. Remember Henry's strange decisions that he made in that he let his last wife do all of the raising and nurturing and education of their children, which included Edward as well as Elizabeth. And so Elizabeth, just like Edward, has been trained in the Reformation ideas. So when Elizabeth takes the throne, all of a sudden they're going back again. And you can see that the Reformation in England is very different from every other Reformation that has ever taken place. When it took place in Germany, Reformation moved forward. When it took place in Scotland, Reformation moved forward. When it took place in Geneva, Switzerland, Reformation moved forward. Only in England do you have Reformation go back, Reformation go back, Reformation go. It just keeps going back and forth, and the people are being drug along back and forth. And so part of Elizabeth, when she takes the throne, Elizabeth is not Thomas Cranmer. She is a queen before a theologian. And so that's going to inform a lot of the decisions that Queen Elizabeth makes. She wants to bring England back into Reformation, but she also needs to hold a country together who has gone in and out of Reformation. And at this point is perhaps a little, at least religiously, a little schizophrenic and doesn't quite know where to go, which side to fall on. And so what she's going to do is she's going to try to do something that's very difficult. And the best example I can give you of this is probably Bishop Greg. Because what Bishop Greg has done in the Episcopal Church is that, I don't know how much you know of Bishop Greg's theology and social ideas, but socially, Bishop Greg probably lines up more on the liberal side of things. Theologically, Bishop Greg is an Orthodox theologian. And so what Bishop Greg has done in the time that he's been the bishop in this diocese is he's tried to thread a very thin line of being open to the social, not open, being aggressive in his social, more liberal ideas and holding his Orthodox theology together. And that's why he's been able to do what he's done in the Episcopal Church where other bishops have been thrown out. It's a very thin line. And you're going to see the same thing that Mary's going to try and do with Protestantism and the Roman Church, is she's going to try and thread that very thin line of being Roman, but also of the Reformation. And so it's a political maneuver that she's doing, make no mistake. It's a political maneuver, and she's going to be that middle road, the via media, if you're familiar with that idea. That's why when you look at the Protestant churches, we don't quite look like the rest of them, do we? We look a little bit Roman Catholic, don't we? But you've got this Protestant theology in there that isn't Roman Catholic. Because what we actually are is Elizabeth's really thin line that she thread right through the middle. And if Thomas Cranmer had never been burned by the stake, you would not refer to me as a priest. You would refer to me as pastor. And there would be many different changes that would have taken place, particularly in liturgy and all that, because Thomas Cranmer was moving towards that. He was much more moving towards the Lutheran side of things than what we are today. But what we are today is the result of Elizabeth being able to thread that very thin line. So Elizabeth's going to do that. As she's doing that, when you thread that thin line, what you tend to do is you tend to make two groups of people angry at you. Those that are fully Roman Catholic and those that are fully Reformation. And those two groups are going to get really frustrated with Elizabeth. But she's going to gather up the masses because the masses are in the middle. The mass of people is in the middle, and she gathers up all of those people. She loses the strong Roman Catholics, and she loses the strong Reformers. Now, I'm not going to go into the strong Roman Catholics, but who do you think are the strong Reformers? You know these people. What's that? Well, no, Martin Luther is already into his Reformation. These are the people in England, and they're the strong Reformers, and they get frustrated with Elizabeth, and they become something. We call them a group of people. Not Methodist, but closer. What's that? Not Presbyterians. They are the Puritans. So these people, frustrated with Mary, are going to leave. We're done. We're out. And they become what we know today as the Puritans. And they're called that because they wanted pure Reformation. We don't want this thin line. We want the real deal taking place. We want Thomas Cranmer back. And they're not going to get Thomas Cranmer back. So you have the undoing of Mary's work. There's a new act of supremacy. But under Elizabeth, it's going to be, instead of she was the supreme authority instead of the supreme head. You'll see small changes that make a big difference. You'll see a new Book of Common Prayer that comes out. Thomas Cranmer revised the Book of Common Prayer twice. He wrote it, revised it twice in 3 years. He was in the middle of revising it again when he was burned at the stake. If Thomas Cranmer would have had his way, the Reformation would have looked very differently, but his life is cut short. Elizabeth is going to take that Book of Common Prayer. She's going to begin revising it in different ways. One of the ways that she does is she makes it more acceptable to those that are sympathetic to the Roman Church. So, let me just bring it up. There's no more prayer for deliverance for the Pope. So we used to have in our Book of Common Prayer a prayer of deliverance that the Pope would be delivered from the wills of Satan. So like really strong language against the Roman Church, that the Roman Church is being led not by God but by Satan. So she's going to do away with that. She's also going to scale the 39 articles down to 39 articles because they originally were 42 articles. And she's going to take away some of the really aggressive articles, the ones that really come down on the Roman Church. She's also going to tweak some of the wording in the other articles so that they're more acceptable to those that are sympathetic to the Roman Church. So all this is being done to make a broader path. So it's a different Reformation, but it's still a Protestant spiritual Reformation. What you see in the church today is more in line with Elizabeth's Reformation than anything else. What we are today as an Anglican Episcopal church is much more in line with Elizabeth's Reformation than Thomas Cranmer's Reformation. So Thomas Cranmer was an admirer of Martin Luther. He was also highly influenced by John Calvin. And so his positions are a little more Calvinistic than Queen Elizabeth's were. It's a very different Reformation. Still a really cool Reformation. So Elizabeth, though, because she's queen and because she's trying to unite a nation, what she's going to do is make acceptance of her policies a requirement. And if you don't do it, if you don't attend services, then you will actually receive a fine. They'll come and they'll fine you for not getting on board, in essence. Unlike Cranmer, Elizabeth was, I already said this, but it's worth repeating again. She's a queen first and a theologian second. Thomas Cranmer was a theologian first. And that's the main difference that you have under the two in the Reformation. So I already went over this. I skipped ahead. This is the Puritans. Some of your famous Puritans are Richard Sibbes. Probably the most well-known is John Owen, Richard Baxter. Some really great theology in the Puritans. I know as Episcopalians, we generally don't think favorably of the Puritans, but I do. And they're worth a read. They've got some great theology in there. And I don't go along with everything that they put forward, but some really great theology in there. And that brings us to the end of the history. This is all going to inform the last 15 minutes, which is our theology. So, Mark, if you could bring up the theology one, which I think is the third one, but I'm not entirely sure. Questions on the history, okay?
How did Elizabeth have the authority to change theology? I know as queen, I guess she has authority to do anything.
She is the head of the church.
But did she have any training, education about theology?
Yes.
Enough to be able to be a...
Yes, yeah, okay. She did. She is being trained in much the same way that Edward was being trained by the reformers and their students themselves. So she's highly trained in theology. But again, not letting that be the main lens through which she makes decisions, which there's some wisdom there. She is queen first. So when we move into the theology, keep all that history in mind. I'm going to keep referring back to it because it's really, really helpful. So, Anglican theology. The most common misconception about the Episcopal Church is that Anglicanism is kind of this buffet of doctrine, and we don't have any doctrine of our own. That you can just come into the Episcopal Church and you pick and choose whatever you like. And you add it in there and it's all this great buffet. This is where the idea of being Roman Catholic light comes in, which is a pet peeve of mine. Because, that too. Because what that does is it minimizes our history and our great theology and says, well, we're basically Roman Catholic, except that we don't have all the rules and the regulations that they do, which is not true. And so the idea oftentimes people have when they come into the Episcopal Church is, well, it's a free-for-all. You know, I can believe whatever I want to believe. When people become Presbyterian, they know that, well, now I'm supposed to be a Calvinist. When people join the Methodist Church, they immediately know I'm a free will Methodist. I know what I am. When people join the Baptist church, they have very clear ideas of what their theology is. When people join the Episcopal church, they basically think, I can believe whatever I want. It's amazing. And it's not true. So I want to walk you through this because it appears that many people think that the goal of Anglicanism is theological diversity. And it's not. And so the concept being, we don't care about theology. All we care is that our liturgy is beautiful. The liturgy isn't beautiful if it doesn't preach a theology. And so every Sunday you walk through the liturgy and it preaches a theology. Every Sunday. But if we have this schizophrenic theology where somebody believes something over here, somebody believes something over here, somebody believes something over there, we can never actually come together as the body of Christ because, well, we're not a body. We're just this loose collection of people that believe different things. And so theological diversity is actually not the goal of the Episcopal Church. So we have very clear doctrinal statements, and they are known as the 39 Articles. And they are tucked in the back of your prayer book under historic documents. They're in there. You can find them. They're all there for you. It's 780 maybe. It's been a while. So I just go to historical documents and I find them. But they're tucked back there. There's 39 of them. And they're doctrinal statements on what we believe as Episcopalians. And many of them written by Thomas Cranmer and the Reformers, Hooper, Latimer, Ridley, all those guys that died, burned at the stake. They put those in there so that we know what we believe as Anglicans. So they're not dead doctrinal statements. They stand today as a means of defining true Anglicanism. This is what we believe. So the purpose of the 39 Articles is actually defined in your prayer book in the introduction to the 39 Articles. And here's what it says. Articles agreed upon by the archbishops and bishops of both Providence of the whole clergy in the convocation holden at London in the year 1562, this is the important part, for the avoiding of diversities of opinions. The whole reason they exist is to avoid the diversities of opinions. I bet you didn't know that, did you? Now, before you pounce on me, and before you say, well, I have my own ideas, you can't tell me what to believe, before you say diversity is a good thing, let me explain what I'm bringing out here. The 39 Articles were written so that we understand what it means to be an Anglican in the church. And they give us some theological ideas of what Anglicans believe. That does not mean that diversity is a bad thing. There's good diversity and bad diversity. And so the Anglican Church embraces a variety of diversity. But that doesn't mean that all diversity is good. And theological diversity is problematic because you and I can't come together as a body of Christ and make theological decisions because we don't even believe the same thing. And so you've got one group in the church trying to bring the church over here, and another group in the church trying to bring the church over here, and we can never come together as a body and go where we're to that one place because we don't agree on anything. There should be some theological continuity in a church. The 39 Articles provides that. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't wrestle with ideas in the 39 Articles. In fact, if you're not struggling and wrestling with some ideas in there, you haven't read them. I am as close as you're going to get to a Reformation Anglican that affirms all 39 articles, and there are points in those 39 articles that I struggle immensely with. That doesn't mean that we don't struggle and wrestle with them. It just means that the 39 articles in some sense define the church that we belong to. And we may struggle along, but that is the defining idea of what it means to be Anglican. So we do have very clear doctrinal ideas in the Episcopal Church. Good diversity, bad diversity, they both exist. The danger is theological diversity is not only not the goal, but it's a real danger. And I've shared with you some of the ways in which it is. But when the church doesn't have very clear structural ideas of who they are, then the church itself begins to break down. And so these 39 articles help to hold us together. So I'm going to walk you through what it is that we believe, and I've separated this into 6 categories. And we will finish this, not today, but we will finish this next week. But this is where we're going to start to have a little bit of fun. We'll bring the history in, and I'm going to open it up more for interaction in this. The main categories are: what do we believe about humanity? What do we believe about God? What do we believe about salvation? What do we believe about the church? What do we believe about sacraments? And then the last one, because I flipped the order, is what do we believe about the Bible? And those are 6 categories, and that pretty much gives you a well-rounded understanding of what Anglicans believe. That doesn't mean that we're covering everything. If you want to argue about predestination, come to men's group. Or come to the Bible study on Tuesdays. We're not going to talk about predestination. We're not going to talk about purgatory. There's lots of things that we're not going to talk about. But we're going to talk about the core of what it means to be a Christian. So on humanity. And we're just going to jump right in because I only got 5 minutes, and hopefully I can get done with humanity. On humanity, we do affirm the concept of original sin. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Original sin is the idea that Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden sinned by eating the apple. Eve gave the apple to Adam, and Adam ate the apple, and they both sinned. And Adam's very quick to remind God that it was Eve that gave him the apple, and it's her fault. And then Eve is very quick to say, it wasn't my fault, it was the serpent that gave me the apple. So the blame game continues, but we do have very clear idea that there's a fallenness in humanity. That their sin, the sinfulness that they have as a result of disobeying God, has been passed down throughout history, so that every single person that is born in the world is sinful. That our hearts are inclined towards ourselves. That there's an inherent sinfulness in us that we don't have to learn, but we have by nature. So example of this is that you don't have to teach people how to be selfish. They just inherently have that in them. You have to teach people how to be generous, how to be gracious, how to be loving. But you don't have to teach them how to be selfish. You don't have to teach humanity how to be prideful, how to be lustful, how to be wrathful. These are things that just by nature we have within us. They don't have to be taught. Now, whether or not you go back to Adam and Eve and you read this as history, or you read Adam and Eve as an allegory explaining a greater theological truth, makes no difference to me at all. The only thing that matters to me is that the concept that there is a fallenness in humanity, that we're not what we were meant to be, that there's a sinfulness in us that needs to be redeemed. as long as we can affirm that, then we're on the same plane. If we can't affirm that, I don't know the need of Jesus Christ. If there's no sinfulness in us, and there's no necessity, or we're not sinful by necessity, then there's no need for Jesus Christ to come into the world and die for the sins of the world. If this peace isn't present, then that undoes any necessity of Jesus. But if this peace is present, what it does is it creates within us, or it should create within us, just this more and more delight in the suffering and death of Jesus Christ. And that's a weird sentence to say. But it is only through the suffering and death of Jesus Christ that your sins are forgiven. That's it. They're not forgiven in the resurrection. Your sins are forgiven on that cross. The suffering and death of Jesus Christ is where our sins are forgiven. So the original sin concept is, all it is to say is that we're not what we were meant to be. That we needed to be redeemed by Jesus Christ. That we needed him on that cross. So that's what we believe about humanity, that our hearts are inclined towards evil. And I already went through a lot of that. We don't need to learn these things. We inherently know these things. I learned that's at a very early age. I learned this when my children were at a very early age, and I realized that Cohen doesn't care about what's going on in my life. He's just going to cry and cry and cry and cry until I give him something to eat when he's a baby. It doesn't matter if I worked all night. It doesn't matter if, it doesn't matter what's going on in my life. He's just going to selfishly sit there and cry until I bring him something to eat. So these are things that we don't need to learn. We inherently have these things within us. The consequences of this sinfulness within us is eternal death. But we also have Jesus Christ on that cross. So we don't possess the free will to actually change this. So this is a really important concept. And I'm not taking away, look, we did move into predestination and free will and all these things. I'm not taking away your free will in any regard. You are free to do a variety of things after church. You are free to go eat a cheeseburger, eat a hamburger. You're free to go do whatever you want. You made a free choice to come here. But what you're not free to do is to do an act that would redeem you. We do not have that ability. We could not, of our own free will, change the circumstances of our sinfulness. Again, going back to, we needed Jesus on that cross. And I have to end on this point. But I do want to open it up, because what I'm talking about in an Episcopal Anglican context is a little bit controversial. I do want to open it up for questions, and then we're going to end it there. But all that I'm saying is we're not quite what we were meant to be. We cannot fix it. And we needed Jesus to fix it on our behalf, which he does on the cross. Questions, comments, concerns, issues? If anybody needs counseling, I'll be in on Tuesday. Now you're all good? All right, we will pick up next week on the theology. We'll move through. It's been fun. I enjoyed it. Those of you who go to the late service, you got church in 10 minutes, and the rest of you get out of here.